Yeah, it's something that I've always been really passionate about the world and kind of getting outside of my own area. I can tell you, even in my own family, I have the rare distinction of having uh, between my two kids, my wife and me, we were all born on different continents. So we're definitely like we have Europe, Asia, Australia, and North America in our 4-person family for our places of birth. And so yeah, I've spent a lot of time around, but I think for the kind of mission side of things, beyond just like really liking to get out and see the world and meet people from around the world, is that I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding and lack of awareness around how you can, particularly with innovation, how you can bring great innovation to market and build really successful companies by approaching growth in the right way. And so first and foremost, I want to bring just awareness to this much better way of driving growth and building a sustainable, successful business. But then secondly, since my book came out, we're on track to do 1 million book sales in the first 10 years. And so there is already a lot of awareness, but I've had the feedback from people who read the book that, a lot of them get excited about it and they understand it, but when they actually try to apply it in their companies, they get pretty frustrated. And it's, so I've spent a lot of time over the last several years figuring out how to overcome the inertia of an organization who's always done things one way. How do you introduce a new way and actually get that organization to effectively adopt it and capitalize on it? And I have a really good program for achieving that. And so that's a big part of this world tour as well, is to engage with both individual companies, and it's a workshop format where it's, growth is cross-functional. Growth is something that when a marketing team comes together with a product team and an engineering team and design and data and, for B2B and sales, when you get everyone coming together and working in the right way, you can achieve amazing results. But it's a challenging thing to kick off. And so in a workshop format, I'm able to get the key people in the room together for a full day and really get them to agree on how are they going to work together more effectively. And so, yeah, I've refined this program a lot by working with hundreds of companies, big and small, from all the way from kind of Microsoft at the top to relatively small startups. And so, yeah, I'm excited about just helping not just companies understand the potential of growth hacking, but actually how they can work together more effectively to use growth hacking to drive really efficient acceleration in their growth.
So, Sean, how can larger and established companies implement the growth team? So it is not only startups or technology firms.
Right.
I think the companies and already established companies can also implement this mindset. How can
it's interesting. I got a question yesterday from a friend of my daughter's who is working for kind of a luxury car dealer, and he's like, I read the book and I got really excited about it. He's focusing on customer acquisition there, and he's basically like, I'm having a hard time thinking about how this applies in my business, but I know it does. And so what I actually gave him, I said, let me give you an extreme example of where I've used the growth hacking principles and process, not even in business, outside of business. And so I gave him 2 examples, and you and I have kind of touched on one of those in our direct communication, which was when I was coaching my daughter's soccer team. But I'm going to start with a different one, which was about a year and a half ago, kind of in the depth of the pandemic. My blood pressure I'd never had blood pressure problems. And suddenly my blood pressure was off the charts high. I was in a doctor's appointment and they took it like 5 times because they didn't even believe it was that high. And they were like on the brink of sending me to the hospital. And so I never thought about blood pressure. And so I went back and I researched and I came up with, 10 best things you can do to reduce your blood pressure. So kind of that's, if you can think of it in growth hacking terms, it's sort of like first understand before you try to improve something. So I really tried to understand those things. And when I told my doctor what I was going to do, she was like, "You're crazy. You can't sustain that." But I used growth hacking to figure out, without medication, what was going on with my blood pressure and how to get it back to normal. And I got it to normal in 30 days. And so what I did was I took each of the 10 things that I learned were the most important, and I made a spreadsheet. And so every day for a month, I was going to do each of those 10 things. I put my little check mark next to each one each day. And then after each one, I would check my blood pressure. So I would, do a measurement, and then, do some other things for a little while, then do the next thing and do my measurement. And I was able to discover that one thing had way bigger impact than anything else. And that was a meditation, but not just meditation, but gratitude meditation. And so what it turned out, what was spiking my blood pressure, was that I have one daughter who has a chronic illness that makes her like her immune, very, very at high risk with COVID. And then I had another daughter who had just started university, and like a lot of first year university students, she had her own mental health challenges. And so I was really worried about both of them. And they were calling me and talking to me for 2 hours per day each. And so like half of my day is listening to these kids that are so scared and so stressed out. And so my meditation, so I started to even get resentment, where why are they calling me so often? So my meditation essentially reframed it and said, I'm the luckiest guy in the world, where I have a relationship with my daughters that they want to talk to me for 2 hours every day. And all that stress just disappeared as soon as I reframed it as like, I'm very fortunate and lucky to have this relationship with my kids. And so again, that was the test, measure, figure out what the problem was. And in this case, instead of up, I'm trying to get something down. And then one other quick example was, when I was coaching my daughter's soccer team, I didn't really, my wife signed me up to be a soccer coach. I didn't really play much soccer growing up, a little bit, but I didn't know much about it. They really needed someone to do it. I was a CEO at a startup, so I didn't have time to do it, but I kind of got guilted into it, and okay, whatever, I'll do it. And so, of course, I approached it then like I do anything else, where I first looked at all the kids and asked them, what do you like to do? And a lot of them said, I'm an offensive player, or I'm a defensive player. And so then I basically started to record. My metric that I was recording was, if I just do score, like that doesn't happen enough in a game to have enough data. So I went upstream from score, which was taking a shot on the goal. And so what I started to record each day, or each game, was how many shots did we take on the opponent's goal, and how many shots did the opponent take on our goal. And then each quarter of the game, I would completely change the lineups. So girls who have always been attackers, I would put them in defense. Girls who had always been on defense, I'd put them in offense, and I would just literally move the kids all around. And so test, measure. And by the end of the season, we were so dominant that I was getting in trouble from the league, that that I was trying to keep the score, trying to keep my kids from scoring too much to embarrass the other teams. And so again, if I could do it in youth soccer, if I can do it with my health, how hard is it for a non-technical business to do it? And so really, I think growth hacking comes down to that there is a better way to do everything. And the only way to figure out what's better is to try other things. And so you need to measure the right things and try other things. And so, whether you're a startup that's digital or a big company that's not digital, the question is, are you doing everything perfectly? And if you think so, you're delusional. But if you admit that there's probably better ways to do things, then the question is, how do you figure out what are those better ways?
How has the growth hacking evolved over the years since you coined the term? Is there any difference? since a
So-
long time. By the way, I forgot to ask, are you also changed your nutrition? Are you plant-based now?
well, for the blood pressure,
Yes.
I have definitely changed my diet. Of course, like sodium is a big factor there. And so I'm not completely plant-based, but I do zero red meat now. So I'm moving in the direction of plant-based, but yeah, my blood pressure's healthy now. So everything else is just to optimize my health. So back to the question you were asking, how has growth hacking changed? When I first wrote about it, I wrote about it in a blog post in 2010, and I was really looking at it from the perspective of the world that I lived in, which was early stage startups. And so early stage startups are very vulnerable. They're always, close to death. And so I was essentially saying, a startup does not have the luxury to focus on things like awareness building. Everything needs to be scrutinized by its impact on growth, and everything that has some impact on growth can have more if you test better ways to do it. So I was focusing on that test learn process, but I didn't really emphasize that it could be outside of startups, because I was essentially saying, if you're a startup, you would be crazy not to do this. And I think where it's evolved since then is, again, that I've realized that the approach applies well beyond startups. So it applies to large technical companies. So one of the companies, that has embraced growth hacking is over the years is Microsoft. Even Amazon, Jeff Bezos, the former CEO, the founder, says our success at Amazon is a function of how many tests we run per day, per month, per year. Like it's, so I think you're seeing that the foundations of success in a lot of companies are built into this test learn process. And so I think that's one evolution, is that it was a lot broader than it wasn't that I didn't think it was applicable. It's just I wasn't in that world. So I didn't even try to apply it in that world or think about its applicability. But then the second thing that's changed is that people got pretty excited pretty quickly, like when they heard about it, and growth hacking. Oh, that sounds weird. That sounds interesting. So they kind of like, it took notice. And I think within a year of me writing the blog post, there were 1,000 job listings for growth hackers, and so like there was a lot of excitement about it. But what you started to see was you started to see kind of people not taking the time to understand it as I explained it, and then kind of making up their own, so there's this thing called growth hacking, and companies are growing really fast. And so it's about tricking people, or it's about being really clever with marketing, or, and so you start to see a lot of kind of alternative definitions emerge. And so that I think that's another evolution, is that there's a lot of confusion around what I originally meant with growth hacking. And, and I think in Europe, you a lot of times see it as really people who do marketing in a clever way. They think of that as growth hacking. I think in Silicon Valley, you have some people who just think, oh, anything that tricks people, that's growth hacking. And so and at the end of the day, I don't care if we call it growth hacking or growth or, scientific method, whatever we call it, there's just a really powerful way to drive growth in businesses. And so that's what I'm focused on, is trying to help people understand what that way is, and help them implement it.
So let's go back. And how will you explain growth hacking term to a 10-year-old then? Let's be on the same page with the definition.
Yeah. So I think for a 10-year-old, I would just focus really, they're not even going to know why growth is important. So I would just focus on kind of more the growth mindset, like where I would essentially say, you need to recognize that everything in the world can be improved. There's a better way to do everything. And the only way to really understand what that better way is to try other stuff. And And to know if that other stuff works, you need to measure it. And so it kind of gets this idea of improvement through testing, and not everything you try is going to work. Some things aren't going to work well. And so again, like that kind of teaches them to apply it in their world. Like if they like to play basketball, they start to say, maybe I shouldn't always shoot it like this. Maybe I shoot it like this, or, you know, they come up with anything that they're trying to drive improvement in school. If I always study for a test by reading, maybe I should watch some videos or write for studying for the test. So that's what I would explain to them, is that just teaching that foundational idea that there is a better way to do everything, and you find that better way by trying other stuff and measuring the results.
You have met lots of startups around the world, and when they were small. You're a founder yourself as well, exited some of your companies. Should you share the experience from the early days of successful startups that have grown huge amounts of progress in your own experience, and from your point of view, like HubSpot, Canva, or other startups that we don't know?
Yeah, so HubSpot, I'm going to have a little bit more insight into, because I was a shareholder in HubSpot, you know, before they did their IPO, because I had been an advisor to a company they acquired, and so I think one of the things that really impressed me about HubSpot in the early days was this thing that I don't hear them talk about it much now, but they called it CHI, Customer Happiness Index. And so I think one of the fundamental principles in growth is that you need to focus on value to the customer, and increasing the amount of value that you're delivering across your customer base over time. And so that being a guiding principle at HubSpot in the early days, I think was really powerful. And I'll give you an example. So when they had salespeople bring in new customers, if those salespeople brought in a new customer and the customer happiness index was too low, that changed the compensation structure for that salesperson. And so it's tempting. I was in sales early in my career, and it's tempting to tell the customer whatever they want to hear to get the sale. But if you promise something that the product isn't very good at delivering, the customer's not going to be happy, and you're ultimately going to lose that customer. And so retention is a fundamental principle in growth, and retention is based on you know, value that the customer is getting from the product. And so I think that as a guiding principle in the early days at HubSpot was really powerful. I'll admit, Canva, I met as the early team. I went to speak at an event in Australia, probably 2015, 2016. And someone, you know, I said, who are the really interesting startups in Australia? And can I meet some of them? And someone said, oh, there's this company called Canva. And I said, yeah, let's meet. I'll give them some free advice, and, you know, we'll just sit down and see if I can be helpful. And so I sat down with the CEO and some of the execs from the team, and I didn't think much of it. Like I thought, you know, this is a neat product, sounds good. And then, you know, then I went to the next meeting, and I kind of just forgot about it. And I took them pretty lightly. And it wasn't until, you know, a few years later when both of my kids came back and said, oh man, I've been using this tool called Canva that's so cool. And I'm like, wait, Canva? Like, if it's reached my kids, this thing must be on fire. And then I dug back into it and was super impressed. I actually had their former head of product on my podcast, and it was one of the best podcast episodes. And so I do think, you know, ultimately the biggest driver of success in any business is not growth hacking. It's product market fit. If you have the right product in the right market, that's going to define your potential more than whatever process you use to reach that market. Of course, realizing that potential then is around execution, and the growth process is a great way to capitalize on the potential. But that's where I think any super successful company started with fantastic product market fit or iterated their way to fantastic product market fit, and Canva would be a great example there. And then obviously they didn't screw up the execution side either. They did really well with the execution side.
So what are some of the cultural differences you have noticed in guiding these global startups? How does the culture impact the growth hacking process?
So it's interesting. So I would say that, like, by far the most successful market for my book is China. China, we've done over 600,000 book sales in China. And so, why China? And I would say that East Asian culture is often a lot more about kind of team dynamics and working together for the collective goal. And that's a lot of what growth hacking is about. And so I think they are kind of closer culturally to being able to adopt it and do it well. So kind of the opposite of that is actually America. So United States, we really pride ourselves on kind of independence and autonomy in the United States. And so you have a further way to go in the United States, and kind of like a culture of ownership. For example, you own this metric, I own this metric, and we trust each other, do our jobs, but we stay out of each other's way, is kind of the starting point in the United States. And it turns out that that approach in the United States is not a good approach for growth. And it's weird. I would think a culture of ownership and autonomy is really good, but growth, what that ends up doing is creating disjointed experiences for a customer. So, marketing brings them to the front door, kind of product keeps making the product better. For a lot of organizations for a long time, that space in between marketing and product, no one owned. And so it became this black hole where you lost a lot of customers. And so, to be really successful, you need to be able to get teams working closely together to have a customer experience that's really a fluid customer experience, about getting them to the right experience and getting them back there often. And so growth hacking, when it's successful, actually looks the same in China or in the United States, at least in my experience. And it's about having a team that works well together, that has a shared understanding of growth, has a one metric that dominates all other metrics. We call the North Star metric, agrees in a test learn process where everyone knows that when there's an opportunity to get more customers to a more valuable experience, it doesn't matter which team owns that. We're going to work on that opportunity to maximize that, to improve it. And so I think successful growth hacking surprisingly looks the same. It's sort of like saying, again, I think growth hacking and the scientific method are almost the same thing. And it's like, well, what does the scientific method look like in Turkey versus the Netherlands? The truth is, it looks the same. It's about hypotheses and testing those hypotheses and looking at the data. And so I think where culture comes in, it's more about what are the challenges in getting a group of people to execute it. And so that's probably where the culture piece comes in. But the success actually looks surprisingly similar across different cultures.
So while we are earlier conversation, you mentioned about not only executives, but all the team should have the growth mindset. Otherwise, Absolutely. It is very difficult to implementation. Yeah. What do you recommend for the startups to make a growth culture from the beginning days, by the way?
Yeah. So you have to kind of ask yourself what creates culture. And so I would say that habits create culture, habits and kind of, and what people value and what's important, but then ultimately what they do starts to create the culture more than anything. Because a lot of times you can have like a culture document, but if people behave in a way that's very different than the culture document in a business, the culture document is not the culture. The behavior of the people is the culture. And so ultimately then it is, how do you drive the behavior that leads to a culture of growth. And so that in my experience starts with kind of a shared goal up front. Like what do we want to achieve and how do we think we can achieve that? And then getting people to, and so in this case with growth, it's like, all right, we agree that if we can have people experience the product this way, we're going to be able to create a lot of impact on people. And so we also agree that we're going to have to test a lot of things to do that. And the more that we run tests that effectively improve our value delivery, the happier we're going to be that we're being successful. And so how do you build that growth culture? You actually focus on the behavior of running tests and measure the results, and you need enough wins to validate that behavior is good behavior. And so when you have the behavior and you generate winning experiments through that behavior, you're going to create the results that's going to lead to the buy-in that ultimately leads to people saying, wow, this growth stuff works. I really care about growth. I have an impact on growth. What we're working on is important, and we're succeeding on what we're working on. And that's where I think you ultimately build the growth culture. But it's not about a document. It's more about how do you encourage the behavior, and how do you help the team see that behavior drives the desired results?
I mean, is growth hacking and rapid experimentation beneficial to all companies, or are there some situations where it should be avoided? I mean, are there any downsides of pursuing a growth too aggressively?
Yes. So, well, there's two pieces. One, I'm just going to kind of state it separately. Like, I think businesses that are doing something that's not good for the world, like I would hope that they're not using growth hacking, but you create a tool, and what people do with that tool is gonna be up to them. But so I would just say that as a caveat. But secondly, the biggest mistake that I see with growth hacking that relates to when it shouldn't be used is people trying to use growth hacking in a pre-product market fit situation. So what happens when you try to grow something, the complexity goes way up. So suddenly I need a customer support team. We're bringing in customers here. Suddenly I need to scale my infrastructure. I need a payment system. You need all these things, but it turns out that the core of the whole thing is flawed. Like I'm actually not creating any value for my customers, or not enough value to retain those customers. And so we're now so distracted from value creation because we're trying to grow that now we have 5% of our energy to put into core product iteration, where if we were truthful and we said, gosh, there's not enough people who truly value what we've created, and if we try to grow this, we're going to fail. Now we can put 100% of our effort on a small team. So your burn level is way lower. So maybe you can have 5 people on your team instead of 50 that manage a growing business. 5 people are managing the iteration of getting that product to a level where you can really keep the target customer happy on the product. And so that I think is probably the most important lesson when it comes to growth hacking, is that if you do not have validated product market fit, then growth hacking is probably going to accelerate your path to going out of business.
I understand, completely understandable. Are there any avoid pirate metrics that don't actually drive the growth, but seems to be looking great metrics to follow?
Yeah, so I think there's metrics that don't drive growth, but I actually think the pirate metric framework is actually a pretty good one. So, acquisition all the way down to retention and referral and revenue, that anytime you can make an improvement on any one of those, you're going to increase your ability to capture and retain customers in a sustainable way in the business. So, to me, like the best example that I would say of like when I see companies focus on a metric that doesn't help the business would be like app downloads, for example, or registrations for their business. And so it really depends on how do you define acquisition. If you define acquisition as getting someone to a good first experience with the product, which, you know, some might say is all the way to activation, but then I think acquisition is important. But if you simply say, oh, I got 10,000 registrations for my product, but not a single one of them actually used the product, that's where I see a lot of companies make the mistake of thinking that they're growing, but they're not. They're just building up a list of people that they can try to spam later with email, but they're not really creating value. So that's where having a North Star metric. So a North Star metric is really a metric that captures how much value you're delivering to your customers. So a couple of examples would be Uber looks at weekly rides, and Facebook and Slack look at just daily active users. But I think in both cases, you're talking about people who actually use the service, who experience the service for the value that it has to offer. If you're focused on that metric, then all of the pirate metrics are going to contribute to moving that metric, and then you're moving in the right direction. And so it becomes really important. One of the first things we do in my workshops is help each company define the right North Star metric that everyone in the company should understand and should monitor and should understand their role in moving that metric in the right direction.
So, for example, with the workshops, who should be your target companies that can also participate the workshops in Istanbul?
So again, I've had a big range. So eBay's had me back for multiple times. So particularly in their classified business units across Europe, they've had me back. Microsoft with their Office 360 group, but then a lot of smaller companies. Actually, I worked with Jotform in Turkey. I was really impressed with that team. And again, with Jotform, it's a great example of a relatively low price product all the way up to enterprise sales, and how do you get an integrated engine working well with that? So I think the more that a business has super unique needs, we probably need to do like a private workshop, like I had done with Jotform. But for a lot of businesses, they can benefit from a group workshop where we have 10 companies together, and I think probably there the only ones that probably aren't a good fit would be enterprise targeted businesses that maybe do just, a handful of transactions a year, because you're not going to get enough data to iterate on. So they still might benefit, but they're not going to benefit nearly as much as a business to consumer business, or even a B2B like a Slack or a HubSpot that has a free version or a relatively low price version, where they get a very high velocity model of lots of people signing up and using the product, and trying to drive that engagement that leads to the upsells. Those companies will get a lot of benefit, and that particularly if they kind of take 1 month of advertising, 10% of their advertising dollars, and they put it toward this, they're going to probably get a 50% improvement on all future advertising dollars for all months afterwards, depending on like how big their ad budget is. So it's one of those things that so many companies focus so much money on competing to get someone's attention, where the real focus of growth hacking is how do I leverage that attention to deliver great experiences to my customers, where I can monetize them not just once, but over a long lifetime value. And the better you are at that, the easier it is to find very profitable paid customer acquisition channels. Or like in the case of Dropbox, we hit $1 billion in revenue with Dropbox, with cash flow positive results faster than any SaaS business had ever done it before Dropbox, and with really no traditional advertising. And so I think that's the real power of this, is that if you do kind of traditional advertising, you're gonna get a lot more bang for your buck, but you might be able to get away with not doing any traditional advertising or
You
digital.
have a huge experience around the world with these workshops. You
Yep.
know the successful examples of growth hacking, and what are the growth hacking failures, biggest failures? Have you experienced or seen these kinds of failures in growth hacking?
Yeah, I mean, I come back to this product market fit question. And I think the challenge with product market fit is it's not always clear if you have it or not. And so I, for example, in the past have thought I had product market fit and tried to grow something only to realize that I didn't have product market fit. And so that's going to lead to that, you know, as I said, growth hacking, then if you don't have product market fit and you're doing growth hacking, you're actually accelerating your path to killing the company. And so um, I have a lot of people call it the Sean Ellis question now, something that I published years ago, which is a very quick way to assess product market fit. And that's just asking your existing customers, how would you feel if you could no longer use this product? And if you don't have a lot of customers saying that they'd be very disappointed, so I give them the choice: very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, not disappointed, or not applicable. I've already stopped using the product. If you don't have a lot of customers saying I would be very disappointed without you, then you probably don't have product market fit. And so I found that it's around, if I have a business that's around 40% or higher of the customers saying they'd be very disappointed without it, that's a business I can sustainably grow. And even if it's not a global 40%, if I have to segment a group down to, let's say I'm only going to look at the college students. Oh, wow. When I ask the college students, it goes up to 60%. Or I'm only going to ask women. Like if you had like a feminine product, a product for women, and you ask that question to men, the answer is probably going to be pretty low on the disappointment level, unless there's a use case that you weren't aware of. So it's important to segment that data to identify what your target customer is. But if your target customer comes in, experiences the product, and they still wouldn't care if you went away, that's not a situation where you likely have product market fit.
Do you have for example, a growth hacking template for the podcasters, or how to hack the growth of podcasts?
You know, so I have my own podcast as well. And the challenge with podcasting, I maybe you have the answer on here, but for me, the measurement is awful. You can't, I don't even know how many people, I mean, I have some data around how many people listen to an episode, but I don't know where those people came from. I don't know how they found out about it. I don't, so it's because they can listen through so many different platforms. It's very hard to isolate cause and effect. And so, for me, I've kind of come to the point where I've redefined what are my objectives with my podcasts. Is it to create the most popular podcast in the world? No, for me, it's really, I want to talk with interesting people from fast growing companies to understand the nuances about growth in their business. So whether it's a CEO or a head of product or head of growth. And so it's really for my own learning. And then also I get some great case studies because I'm talking to them in public on a podcast. I can use that information in my workshops. I can use it in my keynotes. And it's not like when I'm working with a company directly and we have a non-disclosure agreement in place, I'm always sensitive about what can I talk about or not. So those two things are my real goal. And if I keep focusing on quality, I'm confident that I'm going to attract the listeners within my target group that are going to benefit from it. And so it's even the same thing with the book. Like when we launched the book, so many people are obsessive about, getting on, a Wall Street Journal bestseller list or a New York Times bestseller list when they launch a book. We were just very focused on the quality of the book, like just making the best book we could possibly make, getting really good distribution deals around the world, getting reviews. So when people read the book, they would review us on Amazon and other platforms. And then then just do what we do in our regular life and not spend too much time obsessing on the growth of the book. And, the numbers that the book's on in any given year, there's about 500,000 fiction and nonfiction books that come out published, with a publisher, without a publisher. And of those books, about 20 of them will go on to sell 1 million copies in the first 10 years. We are one of those 20, and we didn't obsess on the numbers. We just obsessed on both the value of the book and also on not being too short-term tactical, but being kind of evergreen content that is going to benefit people today, but also going to benefit people 5 years from now. That it's something that would not be outdated. And then finally, the thing I probably underestimated the most with the book was the power of having people from outside the industry help us as editors on the book. So we anytime that we wrote something, it was very easy to lean on jargon and not even realize it was jargon, but to have editors who would say, what the heck does that mean? I don't understand that. And so to be able to kind of get the meaning behind the jargon and make it a lot more accessible, so that, like, my mother, for example, when she read it as a hospital nurse, she's like, oh, this is fantastic. I could see how I could apply it in my own world of work. And I talked to a rowing coach who just this past week who essentially said that he read the book, and a lot of the things that he's applied, he actually has now 300% more people trying to get on the team than he had a year ago. And a lot of that's based on things that he picked up from the book. So I think the broader applicability is because we had people from outside the industry contributing to it. So that's a long answer to your question about podcasts, but ultimately that it comes back to the product market fit piece, that, like, potential is defined by product market fit. You can kind of execute your way into growth that goes beyond really what your potential is, but you're always going to come back to your potential in the long term. So in the short term, maybe you get really clever and come up with a great idea, but if you're not providing value for the people who experience your product, you're not going to keep those people. They're not going to tell their friends, and you're not going to have long-term growth. And that's the goal here, is long-term growth.
I think my purpose from my own recordings and podcasts are learning for myself. So yeah. I invite the people and also the persons that I wanted to talk with and learn from them. And that's all. I'm not looking for millions of downloads or content is more important for myself, because I do it for on my sake.
Right. We have with my podcast hosts, we often say, like, our goal is like an interesting conversation in a coffee shop with we bring someone to the coffee shop, we're talking with them, and the people at the other tables are starting to, like, lean in and say, oh, this is interesting. And so that's, we're doing it for ourselves, but we think that the conversations we're having are ones that will actually be interesting for other people as well.
I mean, since last year, the AI has been in our lives. How do you implement, for example, this tool in growth hacking steps or growth hacking mindset?
Yeah, I've done it a little bit. So I had one of the things that I like to do is go back and forth between if I'm only teaching all the time, then I become pretty academic. And so I like to occasionally roll up my sleeves and stop teaching for a while and just only execute. And so I spent a big chunk of this year with a company called Bounce, and they're probably one of the fastest growing companies in the world right now for a company at their revenue level. And it was a really fun project. And so one of the things that I did early on with AI was, in Chat GPT, just saying, give me 20 headlines for a product that does this. And I would just kind of, like, plug in the benefits and I would say, like, give me 20 10-word headlines, and it would give me of the 20 that it would give me, 5 of them were really good tests to run as like headlines on a landing page. And so I think there is some on the ideation side. I'm also an advisor to a company that that is essentially helping you identify opportunities in your funnel where you should focus your experimentation. And then yeah, that I think that ultimately, like, the big value in AI is going to be around around just speeding up the testing itself, so that you know, it's pulling variations, running the variations, figuring out what works there, and then based on what works, one of the big challenges as you get a high velocity testing program going is remembering what you've already tested and what you haven't tested. And if you can ingest all of that into AI and essentially say, you know, what's the best version that we've ever run on this page, you're going to learn a lot. Hey, doggy.
She always
So
comes
yeah,
when she
the star of the
heard.
show.
Yeah. So
So yeah, I think I'm excited about AI, but I don't think it's going to replace the creativity and human part of things completely. I think it's just going to bring a lot of leverage to it.
but it will be in a couple of years' time. What do you think about actionable? Which means today it is ideation and looking for alternatives and also finding like a brainstorm. But in upcoming 5 to 10 years, will it be changing the old techniques, or is there a trend over there?
Yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard to know for sure. But it's definitely something that that is already helping now. And I'm not creative enough to figure out like what's going to matter in, you know, like there's a lot of ideas about how it's going to impact. And, you know, just like with growth hacking, like not every idea works. And growth hacking to me is about trying a lot of things, and then when something works, doing a lot more of that. And so I love all the ideas and creativity around how AI is going to impact growth, but the proof will be in the pudding. And we will ultimately, you know, the more stuff we try, the more we're going to be able to see certain things emerge that are way more impactful to growth than others. And the only way to really do that is through a lot of people with trial and error. And you know, and like with anything, there's going to be people who figure it out first and use it as a secret weapon for a while. And then there's going to be people like me that like to share stuff that figures it out and kind of lets the cat out of the bag.
Outside of your own book, what business or marketing books would you recommend, or fictional? What are on your nightstand right now?
Yeah, I'm constantly reading. I read probably way too many books, but I probably one of the ones that I love the most is that I've come back to a lot is Influence by Cialdini. I think when you kind of understand human triggers, that's kind of a consistent tool. So any of the kind of psychology, predictably irrational is another one. Any of the sort of psychology that just helps you understand human behavior better has always been fascinating to me. Andrew Chen's book, The Cold Start Problem, I think that's back here. Yeah, got that there. Like I really love The Cold Start Problem for a network effect business. But yeah, besides that, like I'm, you know, most of the whatever I'm trying to learn at a given point, there's a good book on it. So whether it's like presenting, I love a book called Presenting to Win. I'm right now I'm reading a book called Pitch Anything. But it's probably the 4th time I've read the book. So I do a lot of audiobooks because if I'm just, I sit all day at my desk, and if I then sit and read a book, I feel very unhealthy. So I like an audiobook and go out and take a long walk and listen to it. And so Pitch Anything again would kind of be in the genre of influence. So like the human psychology side is a puzzle that I'm always trying to unlock there. And again, the idea there is just like being able to see what inspiration for ideas of things to try, where sometimes it's kind of counterintuitive of what people will respond to. And so, the better you can understand how people are wired, and, things like, if bandwagon effect and things where like if everyone else is doing something, you're more likely to want to do it. And consistency theory, like if someone says I identify this way, then you give them an opportunity to act in the way they identify. They're much more likely to do it if they previously said they identify that way. And so that starts to give you a lot of kind of guidance into how do you onboard people effectively into a product.
Sean, this is a wonderful conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you again for your time and insights. It has been invaluable.
Yeah, I'm very excited to come to Istanbul and work with you on putting together a big event to get the community together, and then having a smaller group of companies work with me on workshops. And but yeah, it's I first went to Istanbul when I was in university. I studied in Budapest for a year, and just went by myself, jumped on a bus, and went down to Istanbul from Budapest, and loved the city then, and haven't been back since. So I'm excited to go back now and really get to know the startup scene there.